The moment the door locked behind us, I knew I had to act fast. But how do you fight back when fear has you frozen? This was supposed to be just another flight, another uneventful trip through the sky. Instead, it turned into the most terrifying experience of my life, one that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about safety. It started innocently enough. The cabin lights dimmed for the late-night flight, and most passengers settled into their seats. I had a window seat, headphones in, and was planning to doze off for the journey. Somewhere around the middle of the flight, I noticed a man walking up and down the aisle. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was stretching his legs or headed to the toilet. Normal things for a passenger to do. But then he lingered. He wasn't moving with purpose. He was pausing, scanning as if looking for something or someone. He stopped near my row, glanced my way, and then moved on. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was nothing. But a strange tension began to build, a feeling I couldn't shake. The first direct interaction happened when he brushed against my seat while walking by. It could have been an accident, but when he passed again, his hand deliberately touched the edge of my armrest. It was subtle, but enough to make my skin crawl. I pulled my arms closer to my body, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. Instead, he stopped by my seat, leaned in, and asked if I needed help with anything. His tone was off, not friendly, not casual, but something that made my stomach tighten. Things escalated quickly after that. He returned a few minutes later, standing far too close in the narrow aisle. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound firm but polite, hoping he'd move on. Instead, he smiled, a thin, unsettling grin, and stepped closer. "You seem tense," he said, his voice low enough that others around us wouldn't hear. My heart raced, a mix of anger and fear coursing through me. I turned my head away, desperate to avoid any more interaction, but he leaned in, his presence suffocating. "Let's talk somewhere quieter," he whispered, gesturing toward the toilet at the back of the plane. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, not hard, but with enough force to pull me up. I stumbled, glancing around the cabin, hoping someone noticed. If they did, no one intervened. He guided me toward the toilet, his grip tightening as I tried to pull away. Panic set in as the door closed behind us, sealing me in that claustrophobic space with him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to amplify the terror of the moment. "Relax," he said, his tone disturbingly calm. My back was against the wall, my mind racing for a way out. I knew I had to act, but fear kept me frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I glanced around the small space, desperate for anything I could use. There wasn't much, a tiny sink, paper towels, a mirror. He moved closer, his voice taking on a mockingly soothing tone. "You don't need to be afraid." But his words only heightened my fear. He was standing in my backside. He put something in me, as I feel he put his tongue between. I tried to stall. "I need to leave," I said, my voice trembling but firm. He smirked, blocking the door. "We're just talking," he replied. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. I could feel the walls closing in, my mind running through scenarios. What if no one heard me? What if no one came? Then I remembered something a friend once told me. People often hesitate to act until they hear a clear call for help. I took a deep breath, mustering every ounce of courage. With all the force I could summon, I yelled, "Help! Someone help me!" The sound of my own voice startled him. He hadn't expected me to fight back. He reached out as if to silence me, but I ducked, pushing past him with all my strength. My hand fumbled for the door handle, and as soon as I felt it twist open, I bolted into the aisle. The flight attendants were already rushing toward me, alerted by the commotion. I pointed back at the toilet, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. Passengers turned in their seats, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. Some murmured, others stared. But in that moment, I didn't care about their reactions. I cared about getting away. The flight crew acted swiftly, escorting the man to another part of the plane. They assured me he would be dealt with upon landing, and for the rest of the flight they kept a watchful eye on me, making sure I felt safe. Even as the immediate danger passed, the adrenaline still coursed through my veins. I sat back in my seat, my hands trembling, my mind racing. The whispers around me grew louder. People were piecing together what had happened, but their words barely registered. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely empowered. I had faced my fear and taken action when it mattered most. And while I wished none of it had happened, I knew that speaking up had made all the difference. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The fear that had kept me frozen gave way to a wave of defiance I hadn't known I possessed. I wasn't going to let this happen. Not to me. Not here. Not now. With every ounce of strength in me, I pushed back against him. My palms slammed against his chest, catching him off guard. "Get away from me!" I shouted, my voice loud enough to cut through the low hum of the plane's engines. The force of my words startled him. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stumbled a step back. For a split second, I saw hesitation flash across his face. He hadn't expected resistance. That hesitation was all I needed. I lunged for the door, my hands scrambling to twist the latch. But before I could swing it open, he grabbed my wrist, his grip ironclad. Panic surged through me, but so did determination. "Let me go!" I screamed, twisting and pulling with all my might. The sound of my voice grew louder, more desperate, and it was enough to draw attention. Outside, I could hear muffled voices, hurried footsteps. Someone was coming. Realizing this, his grip slackened just enough for me to yank my hand free. With one final shove, I threw the door open and stumbled into the aisle, nearly colliding with a flight attendant. She caught me, her hands steadying me as I gasped for air. "What happened?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. Before I could respond, he emerged from the toilet, his face pale, his demeanour suddenly defensive. "She's overreacting," he muttered, but his words were drowned out by the flurry of activity around us. The flight attendants moved quickly, placing themselves between him and me. One of them guided me to an empty seat, while another escorted him away. The other passengers watched, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. As I sat down, the reality of what had just happened hit me like a tidal wave. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the murmurs around me. The flight attendants knelt beside me, asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. I shook my head, unable to find the words to explain the storm of emotions raging inside me. Minutes felt like hours as the plane's crew worked to restore order. The man was relocated to a seat at the far end of the cabin, under watchful eyes. They assured me he'd be met by authorities upon landing. Their words were meant to comfort me, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins made it hard to feel anything but exhaustion. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes as tears slipped down my cheeks. The whispers of the passengers around me grew louder, but I didn't care. All that mattered was that I was safe. I had stood up for myself in a moment where silence would have been easier, and for that I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and pride. As the plane began its descent, I found myself reflecting on the incident. The fear, the courage, the fight. It had all happened so quickly, yet every detail felt etched into my memory. This experience wasn't just a terrifying ordeal, it was a turning point. I had discovered a strength within myself that I hadn't known existed, and that realization was empowering beyond words. As the wheels touched the runway, a wave of relief washed over me, but it didn't erase the thoughts swirling in my mind. What had just happened wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reminder of how often we're placed in situations where silence feels like the safer option. But in that moment, I learned something powerful. Silence protects no one but the wrongdoer. Once the plane came to a stop, the flight attendants informed me that airport security would be waiting. They assured me that my safety was their priority, and they were true to their word. As I disembarked, 2 security officers approached, their presence a welcome sight. I explained everything to them, recounting the details with trembling hands but a steady voice. The man was escorted off the plane separately, his defiance replaced by what looked like unease. Walking through the airport, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and pride. Exhaustion from the emotional toll of what had just transpired, but pride because I had found the courage to act. In a moment of fear, I had chosen to stand up for myself, and that choice made all the difference. This experience taught me that our voices are our greatest tools. Too often we convince ourselves to stay quiet out of fear of making a scene or being misunderstood. But that silence only perpetuates the problem. If I had stayed silent, who knows how far he might have gone? How many others might have suffered because no one spoke up? It's not easy to confront fear, especially when you feel alone. In that small, cramped airplane toilet, I felt like the most isolated person in the world. But when I yelled for help, I realized I wasn't alone. The flight attendants, the passengers, the airport security, they all played a part in ensuring my safety. And that's something we need to remember. When one person speaks up, it encourages others to act. To anyone watching this who has ever felt powerless in a similar situation, let me say this: your voice matters. Whether it's on an airplane, at work, or walking down the street, you have the right to speak up when something feels wrong. And when you do, you might be surprised at how many people are willing to support you. But speaking up is just the beginning. This incident made me realize how important it is to educate ourselves and others about safety and boundaries. We need to create environments where people feel empowered to act, where they know they'll be supported rather than judged. So here's what I'd like you to do. First, if this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, whether it's a friend, a family member, or even on your own social media. Let's spread the message that silence isn't the answer. Second, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced a similar situation? Your story could be the encouragement someone else needs to find their voice. And finally, let's make a promise to each other to listen, to support, and to act. Because together we can create a world where no one has to face these moments alone, where no one has to feel like they're fighting a battle in silence. The strength to speak up doesn't come naturally. It's something we build moment by moment, choice by choice. But every time we use our voices, we make it easier for someone else to do the same. And that's how we create change, one voice at a time.